Okay, now we're back. Now, in this time, we suppose that the same problem as before still there, but now the government just passed a new law cutting taxes, like the tax cuts of 2017 in the United States. The government now cuts taxes by $200 billion. In each of the following two scenarios, determine what happens to public savings, private savings, national savings, and investment. Consumers save the full proceeds of the tax cuts. So in this case, consumers actually save the tax cuts. What happens? Let's I'm going to look at this to just save time. We already did the calculations in the previous parts. Let's see, the consumers now save, if the consumers save the full 200 billion, national saving is unchanged, because national savings is what I save and what the government saves put together. When someone saves less and gives the money to me and I save the equal amount, it won't change. But this is the more important part. Consumers save only 25% of the tax cut and spend the other 75%. So now national saving is going to drop. If consumers save 50 billion, let's say the government so T went down by $200 billion. It went back to the consumers. Now, the consumers can either save this money or consume it. So the consumers decided to save only, what was the consumers' private savings? Private savings was everything we have produced minus what we paid to the government minus we consume. Now this went down by 200 billion. So the whole thing, it went up by 200 billion. But instead of not touching our consumption and saving this money, this 200 billion, now we decide to consume a little bit more, to spend, sorry, this should go up. Here, consumption goes up by 150 billion. So now the government paid back 200 billion of my taxes or reduced my taxes by 200 billion. But I, on the other hand, consumed 150 billion of this money. So in total, this equation, which is private saving, only went up by 50 billion. So what was public saving? Public saving was what the government makes, the taxes, minus what the government spends. We assume government spending doesn't change, but now the government is having 200 less billion dollars as income. This is our public saving, went down by 200. Our private saving went up by 50. So our total savings, when you put these two together, it went down by 150. If consumers save $50 billion and spend 150 billion, the national saving and investment each fall by 150 billion. Remember, investment always equals to national saving. National saving is what I save plus what the government saves. Which of these two scenarios do you think is more realistic? Why is this question important? Obviously, the more realistic scenario would be the second one, because now when government reduces our taxes, we're going to give ourselves a break. Yes, probably I can now buy that car I always wanted to buy. Probably I can afford to go to that vacation I always wanted to go. Probably I can buy new furniture, give myself a break. But what happens, why is this question important? It's because now the national saving has decreased. National savings means investment. Now people who wanted to go to the bank and borrow money to start a new factory, that they don't have that kind of money. So future economic growth will be in danger. At least this is the argument behind this. One more side of the argument would be that when people consume more, producers are now incentivized to produce more. Now people have more reason because in economics we have substitution effect and income effect. Suddenly my taxes went down, so my income went up. Now I have more money to spend. But at the other side, businesses now have more reason to produce more. So now businesses have more reason to go and pay higher interests to the banks to get loans to be able to meet the new drive in consumption. This will then lead to me having more reasons to consume less, to save more money, because now I'm going to get a higher interest if I save more. So this is a very complex situation. I think it's too early to answer whether tax cuts in 2017 was a good thing or a bad thing. Perhaps in 10 years, we could see what happened here. Why is this question important? Still, it's very important to reach a strong verdict on whether taxes should be high or should be low, whether the government should cut taxes or increase taxes. This very simple example, of course, it is very simple. It's too simple to look at the problem as big as tax cuts like this, but it very beautifully illustrates why this problem is very important. The meaning of saving of investment. Private saving, income remaining after households pay their taxes and pay for consumption. Examples of what households do with savings. Well, people can go buy corporate bonds or equities, purchase a certificate of deposit at the bank, or in other words, put their money in the bank, buy shares of a mutual fund, or let accumulate in savings or checking accounts. So these are all the different options available to a consumer. Household, sorry. Consumers, households, private sector. They can save their money using any of these different ways. Investment, on the other hand, is the purchase of new capital. Examples of investment: General Motors spends $250 million to build a new factory in Flint, Michigan. That's one definition of investment. Or I, as let's say a private industry teacher, like a private teacher, I'm a one person, I'm economically active. I buy $5,000 worth of computer equipment so that I can teach better. That's like something I'm telling my wife, if I could buy a brand new computer because my online teaching is being hampered, but she doesn't believe me because she thinks I just want to have a fancier computer. Jokes aside, if you buy better equipment for yourselves, you can increase the efficiency of your business. I can make myself a better teacher. Perhaps my boss is going to see this video, sees now I have this brand new computer, my videos are more effective and prettier than before. So now I'm going to get another classes. My income will go up. This will be the return on my investment. Remember, what is investment? Investment is when I don't consume money so that I save it or I invest it some other place. These are the same. Saving and investment, they're the same. So that I can enjoy the rewards of that investment. Therefore, I can consume more in the future. That's the definition of investment. That's why people invest. That's why, for example, my parents always tell me to save some money because they want me to be able to, let's say, in 10 years, buy a house of my own so that I won't have to pay rent. And then I can have more money to consume. I have more uh, available income so that I can go have a nicer life altogether. That's the idea behind investment. Loanable funds market, the supply and demand model of the financial system. I'm really sorry we're not in a classroom. I always love to explain this. I always love to see the look on students' faces when I explain this. Helps us understand how the financial system coordinates saving and investment, how government policies and other factors affect saving, investment, interest rate. Loanable funds market. That's the beauty of economics. In economics, everything must have a price. Everything. You must be able to either produce or buy and sell everything. Everything, including money. Money itself, the very tool we use to buy stuff, can be bought and sold. And that's the beauty of economics. Supply demand model for loanable funds or financial system. Assume only one financial market for the sake of simplicity. We assume that the whole country or the whole country is like a village with 50 people and it has only one financial market. All savers deposit their saving in this market. Everyone who has some money left, paid his taxes or her taxes, satisfied consumptions. I have some money left. I put it in that market. I'll save it in that market. Now, all borrowers take out loans from this one market. There is one interest rate, which is both the return of which is both the return to saving and the cost of borrowing. The beauty here, what is the price of money? It's the interest rate. Interest rate is how much more money I have to pay back when I borrow some money. That is the price of money. That's the beauty of it. I love it. I love this subject. I really love it. Very interesting for me. So the supply of loanable funds comes from savings. People like retired high school teachers have some money saved, they supply it. Households with extra income can loan it out and earn interest. Public saving, if positive, adds to national savings and the supply of loanable funds. When the government has budget surplus, the government is left, let's say, with $100 billion. So what the government does with that $100 billion at the end of the day, it puts it in a bank or loans it out to people through the financial system. If it's negative, when the government actually consumes more, spends more than all its revenues, which is taxes, then the government needs to go to the same market and ask for a loan. If negative, it reduces national saving and the supply of loanable funds. Remember supply demand curve? This is the supply and demand curve for money itself, for loanable funds, which is one as it's not like money, but it's one definition, one aspect of funds. Let's see here. We have a supply curve. This is the supply curve. We have the demand curve. Now, this is the quantity, if you remember. This is the price. Quantity is how much money I'm going to save. Let's say I'm a retired high school teacher. I'm here on the supply side. I have some money. I haven't decided whether I want to go to France, watch see the Eiffel Tower, or whether I want to save this money in the financial market. What makes me make the decision is the price of saving that money. If the price that I'm going to get, if I, let's say, sell this money in the financial market, that price is interest rate. So this is interest, denoted by I, interest rate. When the interest rate is, let's say, 5%, I save, I have, let's say, 10,000. Now I save only $1,000. I spend the $9,000 left on consumption. Go to France, I buy myself some nice furniture, things like this. When the interest rate rises to 10%, now I have more incentives to save more and consume less, because now I can gain more benefits by saving. I can get more interests. So next year, I can not only go to Paris, but also I can afford to buy myself, let's say, new furniture. Instead of choosing only one option for consumption, this year, I can either only go to Paris or I can only buy myself new furniture. But now if I save my money, let's say $2,000, next year I'm going to get my $2,000 back plus 10% interest, which is $200. And using this money, now I can afford to go to France and buy myself some furniture. So I would choose this option. I would say, okay, I'll wait another year so I can consume more in future. That's the idea behind supply financial. An increase in interest rate makes saving more attractive, which increases the quantity of loanable funds supplied or available supplied. The demand for loanable funds comes from investment. People who are economically active, like most of you, in a few years, you'll be on the job market. Some of you may decide to work for yourselves. Some of you will say, okay, I don't want to be a wage earner. I want to open my own business. I have this brilliant idea I saw in college. I would implement this idea. But to be able to implement this idea, you need funds. That's why you go to the bank, you take out the loan. For example, my dad used to work for Pepsi company before he retired. In the last few years, he got involved in inventory management, and then he saw these numbers and realized that if he opens a cold store business, like an agricultural supply, it's a very healthy industry. It's a very healthy business, very profitable. So as soon as he was retired, he had some money saved. My mom had money saved. They put it together. They went to the bank. They got a loan. They opened their new business. The demand for loanable funds comes from investment. Firms borrow the funds they need to pay for new equipment, factories, etc., etc. Households borrow the funds they need to purchase new houses. For example, if you remember why it says purchase new houses, because housing is investment. People would invest by buying houses. Their return on their investment is the opportunity cost of the rent that they no longer need to pay. That's from our previous chapter, chapter 11, and chapter 10. Now, let's talk about the slope of the demand curve. Let's say you just graduated, you want to start a new business. Then interest rate is 5%. You say, okay, I can now borrow a lot of money and open, let's say, 2 fast food restaurants. I can run the first fast food restaurants quite effectively, the second one not so much. So I'm expecting to make 6% profits from both of them. So I can now borrow, let's say, how much? This is, let's say, $4,000. Now I can borrow $4,000, open 2 fast food restaurants when interest rate is 5%. But then interest rate goes up to 10%. At this point, you'll be like, okay, I have to pay 10% interest, but my profits is only 6%. So I won't be able to take 4,000 loans. Now I can only open 1 fast food restaurant because I need to be there. I need to run it myself. I need to make sure that my employees are not shirking their duties. I need to monitor them. I need to make sure they're not wasting their attending customers so that my profits can be high. This 1 fast food restaurant, I can make 12% profit. We're not talking about the absolute value, we're talking about the percentage points. So now, when it's 10% interest rates, I can only afford to run 1 fast food restaurant. So I would only borrow $2,000. This $2,000 that the supplier, the retired high school teacher, was willing to put in the bank when it was 10%. This is when the two sides, they agree on the same price, in this case, the same interest rate, and the same quantity. They shake hands, the deal is signed, that is called our equilibrium. Now, the slope of the demand curve, if you remember, what was the slope of the demand curve? The opportunity cost. The fall in the interest rate reduces the cost of borrowing, which increases the quantity of loans available. That was the story we just said. Equilibrium, the interest rate adjusts to equate supply and demand. The equilibrium quantity of loan performance equals equilibrium investment and equilibrium saving. Now, the slope of the demand curve, it shows me how much more I'm willing to borrow when there is a, let's say, 1% change in the interest rate. Or if I move 1 more unit along this path, how much should the interest rate, let me draw a figure. The slope of the interest rate, demand curve, the slope is delta y, which is here, over delta x. This means that in order for me to be willing to move 1 more unit, let's say 1 unit is $1 million. 1 more unit to the right, or in other words, in order for me to be willing to borrow $1 more million, how much the interest rate should drop? That's delta y. So let's say this is 2%. This is the opportunity cost. So if the interest rate, and only if the interest rate drops by 2%, I'm willing to move $1 more million to the right. Or in other words, I'm willing to borrow $1 more million. In other words, it won't be profitable for me to borrow $1 more million. In other cases, if it drops by 1% instead of 2, I'm only going to borrow, let's say, $500,000 more. If it drops by 4%, then I'm not going to borrow $1 million. I'm going to borrow $2 million, $2 more million to be at maximum profit. as any supply and demand curve. If you remember from our first few weeks, we have supply shifters and demand shifters. Tax incentives for saving increases the supply of loanable funds. For example, if I tell you that I'm going to give you certain incentives to save more money. One very important argument right now in some countries is that should we tax people's savings in their bank accounts? This is the case. If I, for example, let's assume that right now we have a 10% tax rate on your money saved in the bank. So whenever you have money in your saving accounts, for example, after the end of the year, the government is going to tax it by 10%. Now, someone comes forward and eliminates that tax. Immediately, your supply curve shifts to the right because now it's less costly for you to save money. Now the supply of loanable funds shifts to the right. It reduces the equilibrium interest rate because now more money is being supplied to the market. So our new equilibrium would fall from this point to this point. This will be our new equilibrium. As you can see, 10 more billion dollars are available in the market. So interest rate fell from 5% to 4%. Just like any other market we saw before in the first few chapters. This loanable funds market behaves exactly like other markets. The only difference is that instead of prices here, you have interest rates, which is the price of money. Now, investment incentive. Let's say the government just issued a tax break or tax cut for corporations. An investment tax credit increases the demand for loanable funds. So now the demand curve shifts to the right. As you can see now, when the demand curve shifts to the right, more people want to borrow money. So suppliers now have reason to ask for higher interest rates. Not only they will now supply more money because now they can charge higher interests. They also charge the higher interest rate. So both of them will go up. Use the loanable funds model to analyze the effects of a government budget deficit. Draw the diagram showing the initial equilibrium. Determine which curve shifts when the government runs a budget deficit. Draw the new curve on your diagram. What happens to the equilibrium values of interest rate and investment? Here, a budget deficit reduces national saving and the supply of loanable funds, which increases the equilibrium interest rate and decreases the equilibrium quantity of loanable interest. What happens here? Supply curve, demand curve. Now the government suddenly increases its consumption or decreases its sector. For some reason, doesn't have that kind of money before. So the national saving rate, if you remember, national saving rate was my saving rate, the private person, the private saving rate, plus the public saving rate. Let's say saving private plus saving public. This was equal to saving national. In the first example, we saw that when public saving goes down, if the private saving doesn't go up, which in this question we didn't hear about it, national saving goes down. And national saving was always equal to total investment. So now this was the supply of savings, the supply of loanable funds. Now it decreases. Now less money is available than before. What happens is that now less money is available. We went from here to here. Those who want to borrow money, they need to fight harder for the limited funds available, meaning they need to negotiate for higher interest rates. When there is fewer billions of dollars available, as you can see here, what the result will be business owners having to negotiate harder and accepting higher interest rates. This would decrease the quantity at equilibrium and increase the price of equilibrium or the interest rates. Decrease the equilibrium quantity and therefore the final investment. But why this is so bad? Because when this equilibrium saving goes down, that means fewer factories are being opened. That means fewer number of jobs are being produced. So in the next year, the economy will grow by a lower amount. And that's bad. That's why budget deficit is really bad. You need to have a strong reason to support budget deficit. For example, you say, okay, right now in the middle of the coronavirus crisis, the government has to intervene, has to save the country. Otherwise, people have already lost their jobs. If I don't compensate these businesses that are losing their business, they're going to go bankrupt. So after the virus crisis is over, they're not going to rehire back their employees because they'll be out of the business. This will be a huge crisis. In order to avoid that, I need to support these businesses. Our analysis: increase in budget deficit causes fall in investment. The government borrows to finance this deficit, leaving less funds available for investment for others. That's the crowding out effect. It's basically, let's say we have we have a pizza in the, let's say I just ordered a pizza from Domino's. Now I want to enjoy my pizza. I want to eat this pizza. But then the US government shows up and says, hey, would you mind if I have a slice? Can I say no to the US government? It has the most strongest military in the world. So I would definitely have to give up my one slice of pizza. But what if the US government is hungry, super hungry? Then the US government would say, can I have two more slices? Again, I'm in no position to say no to the US government itself. So the US government would end up eating more of my pizza. The pizza is the supply of loanable funds. When the US government has a higher budget deficit, I need to fight the US government for a loan because the US government will take all the loans available in the market. I need to negotiate a higher interest rates. And I can never negotiate and win a higher interest rate than the US government because the US government is the government. So this causes a crowding out effect. The government will take all the funds it needs and leaves the breadcrumbs for the rest of us. That's why it's bad. Investment is important for long-run economic growth. When the government eats my pizza, I have nothing to eat and I need to eat in order to survive. I need the investment to produce new jobs, open up new factories. If there is no investment, there will be no new factories. Budget deficits reduce the economy's growth rate and future standards of living. So again, we're eating our children's futures. Not only directly by forcing them to pay all these monies that are loans that are being taken in the future back, but also indirectly for not opening as many factories, not building as many schools. Sustained tax and spending policies that boost consumption in ways that reduce the saving rate are likely to lower long run living standards. Sustained tax and spending policies that boost consumption in ways that reduce saving rate, or in other words, boost consumption without creating jobs or leading to equal amount of investments and opening new factories, are likely to lower long-run living standards. As you can see, almost 80% of economists agree. One very good example, if I give you a tax cut and you, instead of at least consuming, let's say, domestic product, go and buy all these foreign products and consume them, then it's the same as if I just pay the foreign government that kind of money. If you all consume something that's built overseas, that means the producers at home won't have that much profit as if they would have, and they won't be able to expand their businesses because the demand for their products haven't changed. So long-run economic growth will not grow up. Well, on the other hand, someone has to pay the interest rates for all the loans that are caused by these tax cuts and more government deficits, higher government deficits. So therefore, we can say long-run living standards will go down. The US government debt, the government finances deficits by borrowing, obviously, selling government bonds, persistent persistent deficits lead to a rising government debt. The ratio of government debt to GDP, useful measure of the government's indebtedness relative to the ability to raise tax revenues. Historically, the debt GDP ratio usually rises during wartime because during wartime, governments actually need money super fast. So they would borrow money, and falls during peacetime until the early 1980s, because in the 1980s, things started to change. As you can see, US government debt as a percentage of GDP, it rose to crazy high, almost 110% during World War II. In the World War II, obviously the US government needed to produce lots of ships, aircraft carriers, tanks, guns, and they didn't have many taxpayers because most men were drafted into the military. So the situation was very hard, was very bad. So the government has to rely on debts, borrow money from people, borrow money from people, borrow money from people. There is a movie, it's a Clint Eastwood movie. It's directed by Clint Eastwood. Let me see if I can find that movie. Oh no, that's yes, this one. This movie is about a few war heroes, U.S. Marines who were brought back from the Iwo Jima battle, so that the US government can sell bonds, so that they can be paraded across the country and sign autographs and talk to people that, hey guys, thank you very much. Can you buy these bonds? This was very important. This was in 1945. The government was having huge debt ratios. They needed to persuade people to give them money. People were like, yeah, but we're not going to give you money anymore because you don't look like you're so much credible. If you look at this number, when someone owes more than 100% of everything that is produced, that's basically bankruptcy. So the US government is almost bankrupted at this point. You could say, of course, the governments can not so easily go bankrupt. But then at this point, you could say that, okay, this is a very bad situation. So you needed these soldiers, these war heroes, so that people are persuaded to buy bonds and give you more money so that you can continue fighting the war. This is a great movie, Clint Eastwood. Love him. If you can hear this, Clint, love you. I'm the one fan here. Okay, conclusion. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Financial markets, governed by the forces of supply and demand, help allocate the economy's scarce resources to their most efficient uses. Link the present to the future. Savers convert current income into future purchasing power. Borrowers acquire capital to produce goods and services in the future. In conclusion, why we save? We save so that we can consume more in the future. Why we borrow? We borrow because we need money now to be able to produce, to be able to consume more. Every decision is made has a rational thinking behind it. The person who saves money is because that person can open a business and produce more money on himself or herself. The person who borrows money is because that person has a brilliant idea, wants to open a new business, needs money. That's how it's done. Okay, I try to keep it below 1 hour. If it went above 1 hour, please don't hate me. Thank you very much, guys. Next week, we're going to talk a little about chapter 11 and then go for chapter 14. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend and stay safe.